Kalau itu atas masjid ada nih bisa ditanya
to everyone and welcome to Robben Island. If I may ask, just very quickly, how was your ferry ride?
Perfect.
You enjoyed it? Now the other thing I just need to mention, and I'm sure you're wondering, where are they going to? They're walking. I've got a very easy and I think understandable explanation why they're walking and you're not. They are going to jail. You're not. You'll be going to the prison a bit later. So by the time we get to the prison, they should be coming out of the prison and they will then do what you are going to do now. So swap around on how your tour ends and how it starts. Your end will be the prison and you will then do the walk from the jail down to the harbour. But this part of your tour, ladies and gents, and what we're going to be doing first, Robben Island is not just a jail where Nelson Mandela was kept in for 18 years. Robben Island has been a jail for more than 500 years. Robben Island is about 570 hectares of land, and that is the museum, the World Heritage Site. Not a particular building, but the entire island. And this part of your tour is to take you through a sojourn of about 500 years of Robben Island's history. Quite a bit I'm going to try and share with you in the 45 minutes allocated to me. One or two things I always like to mention to my groups. I try to talk very little about the prison side of things. I leave the prison side of things up to the ex-prisoner to share with you. And what I do touch on quite a bit is the other history. But like I said, I'm going to take you through about 500 years of history, and my part is more to talk about the other history. And yes, I do touch on prison side of things, but I try not to talk about the prison side of things. And the reason for that is that your guide through the jail will be a former inmate, will be someone that was locked up on Robben Island. You sit in the cells that they were locked up in. He talks about prison experience. I mean, who better to talk about being shackled to the bottom of the Blauberg over there? Who better to talk about what the visitors like inside the visitor center on your right hand side? Who better to talk about being locked up in a cell and you're sitting in it? And that is what the ex-prisoner will share with you, and that will be your last part of your tour before you leave Robben Island, as I said, about 12:15ish. Other than that, for me, it's about sit back, relax, enjoy this part of your tour. Please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I kind of fly over 500 years of history in about 45 minutes. If it's something of interest that catches your attention, please don't hesitate to ask. I also suggest, if you have cameras with you, you need to keep it out, keep it ready. We've got springboks on the island, we've got snakes on the island. There's 169 different bird species on the island. Some of them are rare bird species, endangered bird species. We've got European phalaenopes, we've got about 5,000 penguins on the island. We could see penguins as well. And I personally allow you to take as many photographs of me as you want to. But the springbok is not going to wait for you to find a camera, if you understand my meaning. But ladies and gents, my name is Toya. My colleague who's going to be driving us, her name is Faith. She'll be the one responsible for the drive around the island. Like I said, it takes about 45 minutes. We're from South Africa. I don't know if there are any other South Africans on board. You may raise your hands, see where you sit, so I can ask you the difficult questions. And then, so you're from? Germany? Kenya?
Australia.
Australia? The trees are yours, by the way. Did you know that?
And I hope you're grateful.
You know, the problem was there were no trees on the Robben Island. A really interesting fact, there were no trees over here. This was barren land. Strandveld and Fyn was a vegetation. And we're going to see, when we'll talk about the lepers a bit later, and they also wanted some form of shelter, and they started planting trees. Now, at that time, Australia was a British colony. It was a penal colony of the British. And they brought Port Jacksons and those types of trees to the Cape and Robben Island. Also rabbits were brought here. And that is what you'll
We
find.
got those from England.
Yeah, let's blame the English for that, eh? Or Captain Cook. Let's blame Captain Cook for that. But you will see the connection in many ways. If you've been to Rottnest or Perth in Australia, it looks very much similar and very much similar history. You'll find Rottnest and Robben Island. So I've got Australians, I've got Germans, I've got Kenyans, Americans, Bulgaria, Canada, Netherlands, France. I always ask where you're from because I'll try and explain this a bit later, but also to try and beat my record of 19 different nationalities in one vehicle. One day, amazing tour. I also on that day I met this nice elderly lady from hell. She was really from hell. You can actually Google this. Hell in Norway. There's a little train station in Norway called Hell. You can have your passport stamped to show that you've been to hell. There's 1,480 odd people in hell currently. That's the population of hell. But maybe just to start off, ladies and gents, if you look at this harbour, it was never here. This was a sandy beach. And the Dutch East Indian Company arrived in the Cape. They also realized that there could be problems with the indigenous clan. And if there were problems, what do you do with it? They thought this island could be the jail for the problems they might encounter. And the very first problem they encountered was a guy called Ochumatu. He was brought here to fend for himself, and they arrived on this area where we are right now. It was a sandy beach. The rest of the island, you'll note, is a rocky coastline. And when they arrived here, they found seals in abundance, so they called it Robben Island, the Dutch word for seals. They started killing off the seals for food, for oil, for skin. Eventually the seals fled, never did they return, but that's where the name comes from. But Ochumatu became the first recorded prisoner to Robben Island. Now the thinking was, they were indigenous clan of the Cape, they're not seafaring. If they're here, they don't need to look after them, they don't need to guard them, they will never get off, they're not seafaring. So they were left here to fend for themselves. And in 1659, Ochumatu escaped. He became the first successful escapee when he built a raft and he rowed his way across the Bloubergstrand. But immediately you can see how far back Robben Island was used as a jail, and we're going to see much more. Thanks, Faith. On the right hand side of the jail, you'll see this green dome structure that looks like a little mosque. But that is actually a burial site of a holy Muslim man. Sayyid Abdurrahman Matura was imprisoned on Robben Island in the 1700s. Now, it was at the time when the Dutch East Indian Company tried to safeguard a sea route to the East Indies. So Java, Indonesia, Sri Lanka was taken over. Many political exiles was brought here, and Sayyid Abdurrahman Matura was one of them. He died here as a prisoner in the 1740s. Buried inside that green dome structure is Sayyid Abdurrahman Matura. Once again, you'll see how far back Robben Island was used as a jail. And yet, many people who visit Robben Island on a daily basis think Robben Island is just the jail in front of you. One thing we do show you, ladies and gentlemen, and it's very important to note, is that we do walk you past the cell in which Mr. Mandela was kept in for 18 years. He was in jail for 27 years, but only 18 of that 27 years was in the maximum security prison behind me. 1982, he was transferred off Robben Island to Pollsmoor Prison. 1988, transferred once again from Pollsmoor to Victor Verster, and that is the jail he was released in 1990. But many perceive that he was released from Robben Island, but he only spent 18 years of it, 27 years on this island. On your right hand side, you'll see one or two tombstones. You're going to see a few more graves coming up just further down the road. Now, Robben Island under British control after the 1800s was one, used as a jail, but two, used as a hospital, a dumping ground, a place for the out of mind, the out of sight of society. You see, if you were chronically ill, you were outcast from society. If they thought you were a lunatic, you were outcast from society. You got the epileptic fit, you were a lunatic possessed by demons, and you were outcast from societies. Disabilities was outcast from societies. And this is how Robben Island was used after 1840, a dumping ground for the out of mind, the out of sight. You could also imagine when the fear of leprosy came about in the later 1800s, that colonies opened up. Robben Island became one of these penal colonies for lepers. The idea was that if everyone with leprosy dies out in a penal colony like Robben Island, it's the cure. The disease will then die out with the people, to a point that they would separate male from female. so that children are not born and that the disease don't continue. There was a male colony, there was a female colony. There was a German couple that was kept apart because of fear they might conceive, even though the man was 75 years old and she was 69 years old. Yet they were kept apart because of fear they conceived. They were kept apart, as a matter of interest, for about 5 years, and they eventually died an hour and a half apart without knowing of each other's deaths, and the consolation was they buried them side by side. Well, leprosy, as we know, became treatable in the later 1920s, led to colonies throughout the world closing down, the island included. But when they did that, they demolished every building used by them, to a point that today there's a church that was used by lepers and a few tombstones. There are about 1,200 graves in this area. Part of the jail is built on the graveyard. But we're going to show you here's some of the graves coming up on the right hand side. You know, leprosy, strange. But I think 5 years back, the unknowns around HIV and AIDS, very much similar to the unknowns of leprosy in the 18 and 1900s. This is just some of the 1,200 graves to your right hand side. Now, when hard labor started in 1964, political leaders worked here and they excavated limestone. Very important to remember, they only excavated limestone using shovels and pickaxes. The limestone that was excavated was taken away and it was used to construct roads that we travel on. The other prisoners, the rank and file prisoners, if I can use that phrase, they were the ones that built the roads. They were the ones that excavated the slate you saw around the harbour, around the visitor centre. They built that jail, and that was your hard labour, the rest did. But the political leaders, the B-section prisoners, around about 30, not much more than 30 prisoners would have worked here. The cave that you see on the far side, when it was dug out, I can't say, we don't know, to be honest. We suspect 1600s, when the Dutch East Indian Company had the indigenous clan here and had to fend for themselves. They were using limestone at that time already for building materials in the Cape. So we suspect the cave was dug out for shelter at that particular time. But for a short while, that was a toilet, a place to escape the glare. The glare was very harsh in the eyes of prisoners. I mean, if you read Long Walk to Freedom, you would have read how the glare damaged Mr. Mandela's eyes, that cataracts was removed in 1995 and they found lime dust behind it that clogged up his tear ducts. That's just some of the effect about working in this particular space. But I don't want to talk about the hard labor, to be honest. And I tell you why I say that. I watched this documentary many years back, and the documentary was about the architects of apartheid, the Nationalist Party. And one thing that they mentioned in this documentary was on how prepared the guys were that was in jail for so many years, that was released at the end of April of 1991, started negotiations on the 3rd of December 1991, and they said negotiations started not long after these guys were released, and yet they were ready, they were prepared. And I thought to myself, why were you surprised? I mean, you threw all political prisoners into one jail. You kept all the masterminds, all the political leaders together. So what did you really think they were going to talk about? Oprah or something. And to me, this is what the space symbolizes. How they turned a disadvantage into their own advantage. How they prepared themselves for freedom by not waiting for freedom to come. And if you look at it in a different way, negotiations started on the 3rd of December 1991. We had the first democratic elections on the 27th of April 1994. Took us what, 3 years? To move from an apartheid state to democracy without a civil war. And this is what this space, this island, this jail symbolizes. And not the hard labor, not the blistered hands, not the glare damaged eyes, but how they turned a disadvantage into an advantage. How this became a school, a university. If you read There and Back by Eddie Daniels, you'll read about this married man that comes to Robben Island, belonged to a defunct political movement, thrown with the leaders like Nelson Mandela and others, and he said he came here, thrown amongst these intellectuals, and he felt out of place, not because he belonged to a political movement that was no longer in existence, but because he only had grade 8, and many others around him were lawyers and professors and teachers, highly educated guys. And he said he came to work the very first day and was in a maths class that morning. Later on he was doing English and in science, and he learned that each one could teach one. And he said 15 years later he was released from Robben Island. When he left Robben Island, he left here with a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Commerce degree. And this is how they turned a disadvantage into an advantage. I can talk about Tigang Museneki, who was a young 16-year-old. He was about to turn 17, that never saw the inside of a school. He was literally taught to read and write when they wrote the letters off the alphabet into the sand as they were working. And today he is the Deputy Chief Justice in our Constitutional Court, second high judge of this country. And this is what this space symbolizes. And I think it is beautifully sort of brought together in 1995 on the 11th of February, when there was this reunion of former prisoners. And about 1,200 of them reunited. For one moment, imagine the emotion of that day. When you stand here as a high school teacher, Eddie Daniels, as a lawyer, Tigang Museneki, as a Minister of Transport, a Member of Parliament, as President of South Africa. And these were the guys standing on Robben Island that particular morning. And about 1,200 of them came together, and each one picked up a stone and laid it down. Formed that little can of stones, a little pile of stone, that little monument of stones. And it's a symbol of the triumph of the human spirit of adversity, the triumph of the human spirit of all odds. And what that stone symbolizes is that individuality when you arrived here as a person, but how you all fought one enemy called apartheid. The triumph of the human spirit of adversity, the triumph of the human spirit of all odds. I am being very brief, to be honest, with regards to the prison side of things. As I said, I want to leave it up to the ex-prisoner. I merely shared some of my personal mindset changes. You know, when you first work here, you read about the atrocities and the bitter side of prison. Then you meet Nelson Mandela. Then you meet Ahmed Kathrada and many, many others. And you listen to them talk. And you realize, but you know, how much more really happened on Robben Island. And that is just one or two things I always try to touch on, the positive side of what the space is about. Well, this is the church coming up to your right-hand side. Now, the reason why this church still stands is it's privately owned. The entire island is state-owned property, with exception to the church. And how this became privately owned, Reverend Watkins, a missionary to Robben Island, inherited some money at a time when the fear of leprosy was of such a nature that the minute they entered a building, nobody else wanted to use it. They feared it. So he had to buy a piece of property from the authority. He had the church built, designed by Sir Herbert Baker, and that is how it became privately owned. Today, it is still the only privately owned property on the island. It is now owned by the Anglican Church of South Africa. And then to your right, the oldest standing building on Robben Island, the Gaddison Church. 1841 it was commissioned. For me, one of the uniqueness of this little church is the use of the flagpole on the roof of the building. You see, if you give birth on Robben Island, you will then hoist the pink or blue flag on the roof of the church. You point that girl or boy that is born. I guess that's like the intranet of the past. Right? At one stage, there was even a little school on Robben Island. Little primary school, classes from grade 1 to grade 7. That's his school coming up to your right, which initially was the chronically ill hospital in the 1800s. We are moving towards the jail where Robert Mangaliso Sebukwe was kept from 1963 to 1969. A total of 6 years he was kept on Robben Island. In order for me to explain why he was kept here, I need to take you back to the bitter days of apartheid. During the bitter days of apartheid, you were racially classified as a South African into 4 racial groups. The white South African, the colored South African, the Indian South African, and the black South African, in that order. If you were classified as the black South African, the other word they used was Bantu. And at the age of 16, classified as a Bantu, a black South African, you are governed by a law called the Pass Law. Now the Pass Law was a law that if you were expected to carry a document, like your identification document, and this documentation will stipulate where you could stay, where you could work, what time you were allowed to be in and out of certain areas. If you had to contravene this document in any way, you contravene what was known as the pass law, and that meant you could go to jail for 3 to 6 months without a trial. There was even a special police going around looking for people that would contravene the law. Very easy to contravene the law. For example, forgetting your document at home. You could go to jail for 3 to 6 months without a trial. Wrong side of the road as stipulated in your document, and you could go to jail for 3 to 6 months without a trial. In 1959, Robert Sobukwe starts the Pan-Africanist Congress, or the PAC in short. In 1960, he calls on the masses of South Africans. He said, if they classified you Bantu, if they gave you this document to carry with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, contravene the document deliberately, he said. He said, go to police stations, hand yourself in, do not resist arrest, contravene it deliberately, and we will then go and find out if South Africa will have enough prison space to house everyone. See, we're going to do this on one day, at the same time, and throughout this country. And on the 21st of March 1960, this is what people did throughout South Africa. Contravened the law, went to the police stations to hand themselves in. In front of a police station in Sharpeville, 69 protesters was gunned down. And that was known as the day when the Sharpeville massacre took place. Robert Sobukwe was arrested, trialed, found guilty for incitement, sentenced to 3 years, served it out in a jail in Johannesburg. 1963, he was about to complete his prison sentence. The government of the day felt too dangerous to release him. 400 members of parliament was called to sit down to discuss what to do with one man. And what they did, they passed a new law in parliament, or clause in parliament, which they called the Sobukwe clause. And what this clause stated was that Robert Sobukwe will be rearrested. He'll be placed under house arrest, confined to an area where no one is allowed to talk to him. He's allowed to talk to no one. So the idea was to isolate this one man from the rest of the world, no one to talk to besides himself. And they flew him from that jail in Johannesburg to Robben Island, and the house to my left. There's a water barrel, water tank attached to that house. His area of movement was fenced in. He was guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and not even the guards were allowed to talk to him. A clause that was supposed to last for only 1 year lasted for 6 years. Mentally, vocally, you and I can only imagine no one to talk to besides yourself. He was, however, diagnosed in 1968 with lung cancer. And in 1969, he was taken off Robben Island, taken to the township of Khalishiwe in Kimberley. Now, Kimberley or Khalishiwe is roughly a 12-hour drive north from Cape Town. The difference was he could now live in this community, move around freely within the community. They said his wife, his children would be allowed to live with him. But they also told him if he talks to 3 or more people at any given time, it will constitute an illegal gathering. Even though he had a wife and 4 kids. He died in 1978 at the age of 54, still under house arrest. But this is where he was kept for 6 years in total isolation, no one to talk to besides himself. Yesterday, there's a number of buildings that was never here. These flat roof structures in particular were built in the mid-1970s. Dogs were introduced to help with security around that prison, and kennels were built to house the dogs after around about 1974. But Robert Sobukwe spent 6 years on the island. They allowed him certain privileges, like getting up, going to bed when he wanted to, walk around freely, wear his own clothing, books and newspapers, a radio to listen to, a bed to sleep on, food different to the prisoner's food. But still, a professor in linguistics, brought to Robben Island, isolated, no one to talk to for 6 years. As I said, he died at the age of 54 in 1978. Once again, just to get back to the question you asked me, why did they do that, of keeping those prisoners together, out of mind, out of sight, and speak to many, a name many have never heard of before, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Yet a law was passed, not to govern or rule a country, but to govern and rule one man. I also want to mention another little interesting fact, is that there were 400 members of parliament at that time. The Nationalist Party at one stage had 399 out of the 400 seats, which made the opposition at 1 seat. And that seat was held by a lady called Helen Suzman. voted against the Sabupek laws, very vocal against many apartheid laws. But you can imagine how lonely that voice had to be. I said 399 against 1. But there was a lady called Helen Suzman. And I think it took guts for a female to have stood up and to differ. And Helen Suzman did that. Passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 92. Ladies and gents, I don't know if you have any last questions. We are going to go to the maximum security prison now.